All right. Hey everyone, and welcome back to CS196. Today we're going over Django 2. So our objectives for today are to go over MVC and MVT. We're going to have a review of the app we made last time and how exactly it links with this MVT ideology. A quick intro to databases, an SQL crash course, and I really mean a crash course. We're going to work on Django models again, but work more on how we can actually utilize those backend features. And finally, we're going to utilize data within our app. So it's a quick overview of how MVC works. We have our user here. The way users interact with our app is simply by interacting with the website, and they don't have to deal with all this other stuff. So what you can do is, as a user, you send a request to this Django app, or whatever app, and you just get a response. But on the back end, you have the first thing here, which is the controller. The controller handles request flow, and it handles user input. So if the user tries to do something bad, like submit malicious code, something dumb like that, then the controller will handle all that and make sure the model in view doesn't have to deal with that. It never handles data logic. It then sends a request to the model to handle data logic, for example, getting the user's information. For example, Facebook, if Facebook used an MVC model, they would see, okay, Rohan wants to log into Facebook, let's get his friends and his feed, get that data from the database. It goes back to the controller, which sends it to the view, which will then dynamically render this data for the user. That's sent back, and then this response sent to the user who can see this dynamically created app. So how does this work in MVT? So as we know, Django isn't exactly MVC, it's called MVT. So similarly, a user sends our response, but instead, as I said before, the controller is handled a lot by Django. We don't have to do so much of that controller code. So the framework sees what URL we want, we'll pass that to the view so the view knows what page to render, and if there's data, it'll go get the data for us, and then dynamically render that as a template and send it all the way back through this pipeline to the user. So let's do MVC versus MVT. The model in MVC and MVT are basically the same. They handle data retrieval, manipulation, logic, boom, super easy. View in MVC is almost like template in MVT. They both handle what the user sees. Controller in MVC and views in MVT have similar functions but work differently. In MVC, you have to dictate what the controller does, but in MVT, Django handles that most of that for you. I know it's a little confusing because the names are kind of swapped around, but try not to think about that too much. And finally, we have the URLs. There's no URLs in MVC, but the URLs in MVT is a way for us to index all our pages and let the view know what to get for the user. It also makes it really easy for you to test different pages as a developer and for users to jump around your app very easily. So what did we do last time? We made this app that could basically just print this out for you. Not a whole lot, but let's see how this interlinks with the MVT idea. I'm just going to check if we have any questions so far. Nope, I think we are good. All right. So Django gets the request from us as a user. So this goes to our urls.py. Remember, we had two urls.py. We had one for the whole project and one for the app that we made. So here, notice how we had to include our hello worlds.url. So from the application, we had to include those URLs. So we go to our urls.py for the whole project, which takes us over here, and we see that this URL, as in nothing at the end of our URL, was for the home page. Third, our URL tells the view what page to render. So we know from the path that we want to render views.home for this URL. So we go up to home in our hello world views.py, and then we return. So then views then grabs data from model if we have to get any data, and it sends us the template. So notice we didn't have to do a whole lot here, where it's just one line of rendering, but this would be the data that we pass in from the model. So we pass that to our template, which would then have this data inside it. And notice that we have this weird syntax here. This is called Django template language, or DTL, to render dynamic data and content within our static HTML file. And finally, also I cover that. Let me hide my face for a minute. And then finally, we render that. So we have our templates, index.html, passes this, our index.html is rendered, and that's passed back to the user, and we can access that file here in our browser. So the focus of today's lecture is developing the back end of our site. But what does backend entail? I'm sure you've heard that a lot thrown around, but what does it mean? Well, basically it's a generic term for the things that the user can't see, and this usually involves stuff relating to the data, so think models. So let's go over how we traditionally handle data. So how do we store data in our projects? Well, we use databases. But what exactly is a database? Someone asked, what is a template? So a template in model view template is basically what we render to the user. So in our example, we had this index.html file here, which is just an HTML file which had a Django template language as well to create dynamic content. So essentially it's just the code that we display to the user. So back to, what is a database? Well, a database is a structured set of data held in a computer, especially ones that are accessible in various ways, and that's the straight definition. And honestly, that's pretty good. Essentially what a database is it's a data structure that we use to store data for our project, and that's kind of given away by the name. But there's many different kinds of databases, like graph-based databases, document-based databases, but we're going to cover the most basic one called a relational database. At a very high level, because it's a lot we're not covering or have the time to cover, a relational database or relational databases are made of different tables which store records that relate to one another. So you can think of it as like a regular table, like a matrix, for example, where the columns of the table indicate the attribute that we're recording, and where each column has a primary key, so that uniquely identifies the record. So the very first thing is like an ID or something, which will uniquely identify the record. And the record is the rows, and that's each unique item. So example, for students, the columns could be like net ID, that's your unique primary key, your name, first name, GPA, and then each record or row would be what each different student would be. So each row would be a student. So here's an example of a single relational database table. So this is a table within the database. So notice that we have this primary key here in this column. This is another column here with a different set of features, and this is another column. And then we have these columns or attributes here. We'll call them columns for simplicity. A table is also called a relation. That's why I call it a relational database. Then we have these rows here. They call them a tuple or a row. I say records. It's what I learned here at UIUC, so I'm going to say that. Someone asked, is a relational database like a dictionary? It is sort of like a dictionary in how we're going to use it today, especially in Django, but it's actually built on something called a B-tree. Don't worry about that. Dictionaries are a totally different data structure, but they work similarly. But in a real database, we won't have a single table. We'll have several tables that all relate to each other. So how do we use relational database? We'll enter SQL. So SQL is different from a lot of programming languages you might have seen before. It's short for Structured Query Language. And we use SQL to manipulate relational databases. SQL is a query language, meaning that it's different from most programming languages, because we don't write query languages and tell them what to do. We use query language to carry out an action for us. We only specify what we want, and the language will handle how it gets that for us. So it's different to think for like Python. If you wanted to get a value, you have to tell it exactly what to do to the very, very lowest level. Whereas here, you just say, get this for me, and it'll carry out how to get it for you. It'll get it in the most efficient way that it knows how to. It might not be the best way, but it's super easy. SQL wasn't actually designed for programmers. It was designed for people who do like more like accounting-y kind of jobs. But programmers use it as well, because if you understand how the underlying components work, you can make it really fast. But if you look up SQL, you'll find many different kinds, like MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQLite. There are different kinds of database management systems. We'll be using MySQL, but there's info on the others if you're curious. So you can look at this in your own time. Doesn't really matter a whole lot for the lecture. So what is MySQL or MySQL? MySQL is an open source relational database management system. That's a mouthful. Basically, it just lets us handle all our different databases in a really easy format. We'll use the command line version, but there's a GUI version as well. So installation info you can find on the documentation. It's right there. And also, if you need help, we'll be in office hours, help you get stuff set up. So enough of the theory, let's get right into the nitty-gritty applicable stuff. So to run MySQL locally, you'll need to first run the server. So on Unix, you do this by writing mysql.server start, and then you log in to MySQL by running this command in bash. So you just go into bash, you write this, and then you write MySQL u username and then your password. So if you're opening up the first time, your root won't have a password, so you can just do MySQL u root, and then you can set a password for it and like create more users and stuff. Is the code for MySQL the exact same for any other SQL server? Someone asked. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so let's go through a cheat sheet of MySQL commands. And you don't really have to know this. I'm just covering this to show you how we move from here into Django stuff. So here's database manipulation. So first we have your databases, then you have tables. So at this higher level where we have databases, show databases will show us all the databases. Create database will create a database. Use database will select the database that we're going to use. And drop database will permanently delete the database. So like RM, there's no takesies backsies, it's over, that database is gone. So be super careful. You'll honestly hardly ever need to use drop database. As you can see, the language is very simple. Like it's pretty much like speaking English or like searching in Google. Do this, and it's going to do it for you. You don't have to handle like the cleanup of memory or like allocating memory, blah, blah, blah. All that's handled. So after selecting a database, we can start interacting with the tables. And again, you don't need to know all this stuff. This is just for me to explain why we're going to use Django, because look how complicated this looks. So table manipulation, show tables will display all the tables in the current database. Create table, followed by the table name and then the columns, will create a table with table name and with the column specified. So for example, if we want to do students, we do create table called students, and we want to have the features we want to have, or the columns are UIN, which is an integer and it's not empty, a first name, which is a varchar, so like a string with a max limit of 255, a last name, which is a string 255, student in CS196, which is a bit, so it's 0 or 1, and we're saying the primary key is UIN. So notice here this is really tedious to do, even though it's simple and it's obviously very easy to read, it's really tedious to do. But we're going to show you how we can improve on this. Finally, we have drop table, again, no takesies backsies, it will delete forever, and describe table. And this displays the schema. And the schema is essentially the stuff you specified beforehand. It tells us how our database is structured, or how our table, is structured. I'm not going to go into stuff too much because Django handles this, and it doesn't really matter. I've already done this for our example. Now, this is the stuff I want you to actually look at because this is really important. So querying tables. So querying is actually pretty difficult if you just have your B tree and you have to like find information, because there's a lot of data we want to get it as fast as possible. But SQL makes this really simple by just letting us cheat and just use this instead. So if you do select from where pattern, where we select the columns from a table where a condition is met, and the where clause is optional. So for example, select star from table name. So this is the most basic way of querying a table. What this does is gets all the info from within a table. The star specifies that we want all the columns, and the lack of a where clause indicates that we aren't filtering the table and we just want all the records. And don't worry, I will demo this. We can also do select column 1, column 2 from table name, and this will only get column 1 and column 2 from the table. The lack of the where clause, again, indicates we aren't filtering the table and just want all the records. So we'll get all the records, but only their column 1 and column 2 info. Finally, we're using the where condition. If you do select star from table name where condition is met, this will return all the columns of the records who match the condition. So if I do select star from students where UIN is 1, 2, 3, 4, it'll return like the UIN, first name, last name, blah, 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 all those columns for the student whose UIN matches this. Similarly, if I do select call 1, call 2 from table name where a condition is met, then this will return only the columns specified of the records who match the condition. So I do select first name only from students where UIN is 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll only get that first name of the student whose UIN matches this. Again, as you can see, it's really simple because the syntax isn't like writing code. It's just telling you what to do. It's a query language, not a programming language. So I'll show you this here, but then I'll actually demo it. So example, I have this table. If I describe it, we have all these features. If I select all from students, I get all these students here. And then we can see if I select first name from students where this thing is met, then I get these students. So let's actually demo this for us now. So over here, I have my terminal window. Let me know if this is too small or not. First, I want to run mysql.server start. And then I run mysql u root. And because I reinstalled MySQL, my root has no password. So let's show databases. We have all these different databases here, and we have two for our lecture today. We're going to use this one first. So I'm going to just go use that database. And now let's show tables. Let's see what we have in this database. As you can see, we have one table in here called students. Now the demo we showed first, let's see how is this table defined? So if I describe it, we see that we have a field. These are the fields. These are the types of the fields. These are whether they're null or not. So can they be empty? So the UIN can never be empty, but maybe they forgot to add their first name, last name, or they forgot to add whether they're a student. And it's also a primary key. That means this is the unique identifier for everyone in this table. So now let's go into some actual querying. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. If let's say I want to get everything, select all from students. Boom. We have Rohan and Sammy who are the instructors. That's why we're not students. And we have these random people who are students, which is why they have a 1 there. Take a look at that. Now let's see how do I want to get all the students, for example, from this list. I want to get the UIN of all the students. What I would do is go select UIN from the students table where this condition equals 1. Notice I don't even have to do equals equals like we do in a normal programming language. So when I hit enter, I need semicolon, I get those UINs. And if we look here, we see those UINs match Jane Doe, Sophie Smith, and John Doe. So pretty basic stuff. You don't need to understand how all this works. Just understand that SQL is a query language that we use to manipulate our database, and a table is a part of a database. Any questions about that so far? Drop them in the chat. Let's see anything in here. All right, no questions. That means you guys know what you're doing, so we are in a Kahoot. And it's going to be super short because we ate up a lot of time last lecture with the Kahoot. So here's the code. We have 2 minutes, or not say 2, let's say a minute and a half to join. This is a super short Kahoot, so. Gonna give you guys about another minute. Also, while we're doing this, I just wanted to mention something I forgot to mention earlier. Firstly, go on to GitHub and you should get an invitation in your email with your grades in there. So firstly, check your email for an invitation from someone called Albert. He's our CS196 admin person. He handles a lot of the grading. So you should have an invitation from him to a GitHub. Accept it in the next couple of days because it's going to expire soon, and that'll have your grades in there so you can see how you're doing in the class. Whoever joined with a bunch of numbers, don't do that. Use your NetID. Also, one more thing I wanted to mention was homework drops. So there's no homework drops in the class. That's because we offer 10% of extra credit. The 10% extra credit means that you can drop a bunch of homeworks and still get an A in the class because we're going to offer loads of easy extra points for you to get. We're going to offer more than 10% over the entire semester, but you'll be capped at 10. Then I will take a look for you. I removed you. You can try joining again from the Kahoot. All right, we are starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. First question, what does template do in MVT? Gonna give it like another 10 seconds. All right, good job. So most of you got it right, but there's a little bit of disparity. So template handles what the user sees. So template is similar to views in the MVC, but an MVT template is basically handling everything the user sees. Next. If I run the SQL query, select star students, what will I get? Give another 5 more seconds. Say 10 seconds from when I set 5 seconds. All right. So great job. Most of you guys got this correct. If you run SQL star students, what it says is select all the columns from the student table with no restriction. Just get everybody because there's no where clause. So yep, good job. Everyone answered red. Someone actually called me out. It is select star from students. That is correct. Actually, it was a typo there. Good catch. Extra credit for Kahoot? Probably not. It's only 2 questions right now. All right, back to lecture. So SQL is easy. Life is great. Except we like to be lazy. Like really, really lazy. So let's see how Django can help us be lazy. So in practice, working with databases is a little more tedious than just writing the easy SQL commands. Like what you saw me doing seems super easy, but in real life with many, many databases and many tables, it's a lot more work. So you have to connect to the database server, manually create all those tables, use JavaScript or PHP to run SQL commands. It gets very, very tedious. Also JavaScript, PHP especially is a really old language. Like they aren't very intuitive at all. So instead of working with the database directly by writing tedious commands, we can use the Django models to carry all of this out for us. So a Django model looks like a class in your code. So if you're not familiar with what classes, don't worry about it too much. You'll learn about that in 125. And the objects you create are actually records in your tables. So I'll quickly go over what a class is. A class is a template for creating objects. And you can think of an object as being a single variable that has many attributes. Similar to how a table works. So let's say we have a student object. We could say we could have that student object store its name, store its UIN, store its GPA, all that stuff. So think of it as like a single variable with many attributes. Django handles all the nitty-gritty details of actually transferring the information over to your database. So instead of creating a table, we create an object, which is much easier than creating a table, and Django actually runs those SQL commands for us. So how do we do this? So remember our SQL schema? Let's recreate that as a model. So remember, we have our Hello World application. So let's go to models.py and create this model here using these same features. So notice first that we have to have this models, so we call class students, that's the name of our class. We have to pass this a parameter. We do this so we can inherit the features of the models class. So the class name here indicates the name of our table as well. And all the attributes of our class are our table columns. So all these different attributes here are all the columns in our table. And finally, the field indicates the data type of the column, and a full list of features can be found in the documentation of the field, sorry, not features. So for example, we have the UIN as an integer field where the default is 0 and it's a primary key. Similarly, the first name is a character field, so a string with a max length 255, so it's the last name, and the student is a Boolean field where the default is false. They, by default, are not a student. So before we can actually add this to the table, we have to edit our settings.py. Don't worry if you can't memorize all this stuff. This is just a reference for you. So in settings.py, we first have to add Hello World to our installed apps. So we add this here. And then we also have to edit our databases section in our settings.py. So firstly, we want to make sure that we're using a MySQL server, that we have the database name, that we have our host name, and you can actually just write localhost here because we're running it locally. Finally, we want to put the root or the user of the MySQL server and their password. So our app can access the MySQL server. After this, one more step is we have to run this command in our root directory. So remember how we start the server when Python manage.py and then run server. We want to make migrations here. So the manage.py will handle making all the migrations, and we'll get this output. So it'll create a model of students. And finally, we want to migrate. And migrating, what that does is it'll access the SQL server, access our database, and add that table manually to that database. All right, so notice that after we did that, we do show tables. We would have had our table there. There's technical error there, but we'll come back to that in a second. But why are we still using old SQL, right? Django has an admin page that does all this for us. So if we run our change project and navigate to host, if we run our project, and navigate to host/admin, we will see this. This is the admin page. We don't have an admin user yet. So what we can do is run Python manage.py, create super user, and when prompted, we can fill in the info, and you're ready to go. So after you log into our admin site, we should see this. But our new table won't be there just yet. And that's not because of what happened right now. The reason it won't show up is because we didn't include it in our admin site. And so to do this, we have to add this code to our admin.py in our project. So in hello world admin.py, we want to add these 2 lines of code here. What is the admin site? So the admin site is something that's built into Django. Basically, Django has this built-in admin site that can handle all the users and all the tables that are already within that you're going to create, essentially. So to do this, we add this here. We have to import our model. So we have to import our students model, and then we have to register our model to the admin site, like so. And now, when we load up this admin site again, so if we go to like 127.0.0.1/admin, we'll see this here. And from here, we can directly manipulate the database. We won't even have to use SQL anymore. So how can we programmatically manipulate this information? Because we know how to do it in SQL. We know how to do it in the admin site. How can we do this within Python? So let's first programmatically manage, add stuff to the app, and then we'll fix what we broke on the side there. So how do we access records? Well, remember our old views.py? All we were doing was have this first definition here and return a render. That's not going to do anything. All it's going to do is give us the name. But how do we interact with our database directly? So to create a new record, we can do it like so. Let's define the values we want the record to have. So we'll have UIN new, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll give it a name Rohan, the last name Suresh, and then he's not a student. So to add something to our database, what we do is we just create an object. And this is a reminder of what the columns are. So we'll say our new student is a student's type, so the class that we imported, where its UIN is the new UIN, its first name is the first name, last name is the last name, and is it a student? It's based on what we put here. It's not a student, so 0 or false. Then we save the changes, new student.save, and when we render this request, notice how we changed name from CS196 students to first name. When we look at our website now, we import our model, we went over this, create a new student, save. Our website now will say, hello Rohan. But how do we know that it actually added stuff to the file? Well, look here. We can check out our new record in our admin page. If we go to the admin page, we can click on it, and we can see the UIN, the first name, and last name, like that. Pretty cool. But now how do we get the records? So we can create records. How do we get them back? So the way we get records is, after we save our student, let's say that after adding the student, we want to put all their info, get all their info using their UIN. And this is obviously a little unnecessary because remember previously we have all that up here. But let's say we want to get it from the database directly. What we can do is say retrieve student equals students.objects.get with this UIN. So after saving, we want to use this get function here. So students is our model, objects.get. We use the get command when we want to return only one record. If more than one record fits specification, it'll crash. So let's say we say first name is John and it returns 5 things, it'll crash. So if you want to get a list of records, then we use filter instead. The reason we use get is when we know that this is a unique identifier. So we know UIN is a primary key, therefore it's unique for everybody. But filter would get a list of records. And notice the parameters here specify what one of the records to have. And we can use multiple comma separated features. So I could do first name equals Rohan, last name equals Suresh, like that. And we use dot notation to get the specific values in the record column. So the name after the dot is the feature that we want to get. So if we have here, retrieve student is the student whose UIN matches that UIN we specified previously. We're getting their first name here, their last name here, and we're concatenating them together with a little space in between. So now, when we render this, we'll have their full name and not just whatever we hard-coded before. So it'll say, hello, Rohan Suresh. All right, let's do a quick Kahoot again. I think this one will be really short. I wanted the Kahoot to have shorter questions so we don't waste too much time. So if you don't answer them, don't worry about it too much. And I'm going to take a look at our code on the side here. All right, true or false? We can modify data in our admin page. Only 20 seconds, because I don't want to waste too much time on this. Okay, so we got a little split here. Fair enough, we didn't see the admin page yet, but this is actually true. We can modify data from the admin page. The way the admin page works, it's like using the MySQL command line, except we can do everything just by clicking, and we don't have to make it ourselves or access it from the terminal. We can access it directly from the website. So complete the sentence. In Django, a model is a. All right, that's a little bit of a mix there. Most of you guys got it correct. The students who could answer in time. Sorry about the shorter time. I didn't want to waste too much time on this. So complete the sentence. In Django, a model is a class that the framework uses to create a table. So the model itself is the whole class, and then we use the framework uses that to create a table. So there you go. Quick run the podium. Doesn't mean too much. I don't think we're going to give extra credit for this one. So this was a crash course in Django. Try not to worry too much about the content we covered, about the amount of content we covered, because we don't expect you to memorize everything that you learned in the lecture today. This is just a reference, so when you start working on your projects, you can have something to look at to start off building a backend and a basic front end. So any questions from the floor? And again, guys, sorry about the bug there. I shouldn't have dropped the table. I think I just messed up everything. Hey guys, so I wanted to go over the bug that happened in lecture. So obviously we dropped the table, which kind of broke Django. Thankfully I was able to fix that by basically migrating to a different database. So now let's look at what we should have seen. So we were here where we had this admin page up. How do we actually use this? So we have to look at our website here. Notice we have this URL. This URL is kind of dynamic. It could be whatever we want it to be, but the ending is hard-coded into our urls.py. And /admin is set to what Django made as this admin page. But when you log in, you won't have a username or a password for this administration page. How do you get that? The way we do that is we go and run this command here. Python manage.py create super user. And when you're prompted, you fill the info and you're ready to go. I've already done this, so I'm going to put my own info in here. Or actually, we'll run that for clarity. I think it's cool to see how it works. I've run Python 3, so let me if I run Python 3, manage.py, create super user, it says username, so I'm just going to run admin. Let's do test@test.com and a quick password. So I used a really dumb password that you should never use, but anyways, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna bypass that and use it anyway. So we have our super user now. I'm gonna use that to log in. Log in. Okay, that's fine. And notice that we have these tables here. These groups and group users are basically the users in the app right now. So I go to users, we'll have the admin account. And then notice we also have our hello world application here and the students to model. And if you look in this model here, we have an object and we open this up and it's Rohan Suresh and that's the UIN. And if you remember, if I jump down a couple slides, that's the student that we added. We added Rohan Suresh with 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's not a student 196. So if we go here, we can check that all that is true. See, this isn't checked. I can also delete, I can modify all this directly from the admin page. So now, let's look at our views.py and see how we can modify it so that we can add another user. So we have views here. Notice that we're creating a user here called Rohan, and then we're going to retrieve his info and display his full name using the get method here. We're getting the UIN, which matches the UIN up here, and we're going to get the full name of the student by getting their first name concatenating with their last name, like so. So let's say we want to add Sammy. Let's do Sammy, copy, like that. And now, when I open up the page, 127, blah, 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 it says, hello, Sammy Al-Qadri, and that's cool. But watch if I refresh this here, we have an extra user, and this is Sammy here. And I can obviously modify this. I could change his first name to be John. So after we change his name to be John, remember that we're adding him back into the code. So what we have to do is we have to go back here and remove where we're adding this user. So see we're adding him here. Let's remove that, make a couple changes here. We'll hard code this UIN to be, I think it was 4567, like that. Let me double check that. Yeah, 4567. And now when I save it, watch what happens when I open up that page again. 127. Hello, John Al-Qadri. Weird, but we can also modify the data directly from the admin page, like so. Let's fix Sammy. Save it. Back to normal. All good. So what we went over just now was how the get command works. Because before we were kind of just hard coding this UIN using UIN new, and we'd obviously already added him in. But now, as you saw, we were able to modify Sammy's name via the admin page, remove the insertion, and when we got his UIN again, Sammy had a different first name because we modified that. So that's how the app works at a high level. Basically, it lets us interact with the backend and pull that data and display it to the user. It's a really quick intro to how the backend works, and sorry this didn't work in the lecture.